In May 1866, Memphis became the epicenter of one of the most violent racial episodes in Reconstruction America. Over 3 days, white mobs terrorized newly freed black residents in the city, killing, burning, and destroying with impunity. The riots left 48 black men, women, and children dead, hundreds injured, and entire black neighborhoods in ashes. But this event was not just a tragedy, it was a turning point. The Memphis race riots exposed the persistence of white supremacy in the post-Civil War South and demonstrated the urgent need for federal intervention to protect civil rights. Today we'll explore what happened, and why it still is relevant today. Memphis in 1866 was a city full of tension. The Civil War had just ended, and blacks and whites alike were grappling with their newly restructured world. Thousands of freedmen sought to begin their new lives in cities like Memphis across the country, searching for work wherever possible. Nearly half of the city's population was black by the year 1866. Competition arose quickly between freedmen and white residents, specifically poor Irish immigrants, as they viewed each other as economic competitors. Eventually, Irishmen came to occupy 90% of the policemen's jobs in Memphis despite facing considerable discrimination for years. This led to racial tensions between freedmen and the Irish, as the Irish looked to secure their power in society and the freedmen were their outlet to do so. Policemen arrested and treated people of color harshly and unfairly, and they especially detested seeing freedmen in uniform. This set a precedent for unequal treatment of people of color under police enforcement that is still relevant today. Testimonies from the Freedmen's Bureau described the tense climate perfectly. The testimonies included countless stories from people of color witnessing and enduring the unnecessary violence and harm inflicted on them by members of their own local police and government. Simply for existing and minding their own business, they lived in constant fear of losing their lives and property. Tensions exploded on May 1st, 1866, when a group of black veterans, women, and children formed an impromptu street party, celebrating the return of black soldiers from the war while waiting for their discharge pay. Police officers were ordered to break up the crowd when violence suddenly erupted. The exact cause of the riot is still heavily debated today, with varying explanations, such as alleged violence from a black veteran in the street party, the accidental discharge of a weapon, or mob mentality on either side. The riots continued for 3 days. Mobs burned 100 homes, 4 churches, and 8 schools to the ground, as a congressional report revealed. In total, 48 blacks and 2 whites were killed, and nearly 300 people were injured. Looting, sexual assault, arson, and other crimes tore through the streets of Memphis, with black people in the crosshairs. In total, an estimated $130,000 worth of damage was inflicted upon the African American community, as well as on various federal government properties and agencies that were in support of black suffrage. The riot was finally suppressed upon the arrival of federal troops, who ordered the dispersal of all parties involved. During the riots, the local government offered no protection for freedmen, with policemen and many politicians participating in the violence, as well as suppressive measures against people of color, demonstrating the betrayal that people of color faced during this time. This event set the precedent that citizens were in charge as opposed to the federal government, allowing the states free rein to treat people they deemed inferior as they wished. What followed was a battle between the federal government trying to maintain its power and the states finding loopholes wherever possible, as well as repercussions that are very relevant today. Coverage of the riots varied wildly. Local white newspapers portrayed the mobs as defending themselves against savage freedmen to support false claims of rape, robbery, and other crimes pushed onto innocent black people. The riots were one of the earlier rebellions against black suffrage in the timeline of Reconstruction, demonstrating the continuous efforts to prolong the life of white supremacy. But radical Republicans in Congress saw the riots as proof of Southern insubordination. The passing of the 14th Amendment, which was Congress's response to the violence, was vital in shaping our country's identity by defining birthright citizenship. Being American-born was given an entirely new meaning to people of color, securing their place in society despite its many attempts to exile them. More than 150 years later, the legacy of the Memphis riots is still prevalent. They, along with countless other acts of violence against people of color throughout history, serve as a grim reminder of how a country can repeatedly fail to protect its own people. The unequal and unjust treatment of blacks under police enforcement was created during Reconstruction and has endured various forms ever since. Each year, thousands of people risk their lives in hopes of starting over in America, in hopes of their children becoming American-born. Yet, the systemic barriers and negative nativism sentiments established in the aftermath of events like the Memphis riots reveal that these ideals are far from universally realized. The riots exposed a nation unwilling to hold governments accountable for upholding the rights of all citizens and underscored the deep resistance to racial progress. The question we must ask ourselves is this: how will we ensure that the sacrifices of the past, made in the face of violence and oppression, are not in vain? We must do those who lost their lives in the service of remembering their stories accurately and learning from our past injustices. Only then can we continue to improve as a society.